While people are still arriving, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce the Every Learner Everywhere Expert Network powered by ISTE. Every Learner Everywhere recently launched the Expert Network to offer professional learning and coaching for higher ed faculty and leaders to support their students through and beyond the COVID crisis, including the transition to digital learning. We encourage you to visit the Expert Network website. We are posting the link in the chat for you so you can get more information and schedule a coaching session. Next slide, please. Welcome to the Every Learner Everywhere Strategies for Success in Online Teaching and Learning Interactive Conference Series. It is a pleasure having you with us today. My name is Norma Hollebeck, and I'm the manager for network programs and services with Every Learner Everywhere. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to take just a few minutes to tell you about Every Learner Everywhere and the mission of our network. Every Learner Everywhere is a collaboration of 12 higher education organizations with expertise in evaluating, implementing, scaling, and measuring the efficacy of digital learning and its integration into pedagogical practices. Every Learner Everywhere is one of 3 solution networks sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The other 2 networks focus on advising and developmental education. We work with colleges and universities to build capacity among faculty and instructional support staff to improve student outcomes with digital learning. Our mission is to help institutions use new technology to innovate teaching and learning with the ultimate goal of increasing student success, especially for first-generation college students, poverty-impacted students, and students of color. A few quick housekeeping notes. We are recording today's presentation, which we will share with you after the webinar. And throughout the presentation, we welcome your questions in the Q&A section. If a participant raises their hand during the presentation, we will not be able to unmute them. However, we will be monitoring the Q&A section as well as the chat. As a biology professor and former associate dean, I'm excited about today's discussion, Differentiated Instruction for Equity in Higher Education. Our speaker is Dr. Rwanda Garth McCullough, Director of Programs at Achieving the Dream. Previously, for 12 years, Rwanda was a faculty member in the School of Education at Loyola University of Chicago. Her expertise in culturally relevant teaching guides her professional development work in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. She has worked with K-12 schools and colleges to train staff and instructors on the principles and methods of culturally responsive teaching and revise curriculum across disciplines. Rwanda approaches her work from an inclusive, culturally affirming, and asset-based perspective. Dr. Garth McCullough supports educators to define and create opportunities to invite and integrate their students' cultural knowledge and experiences as a cognitive tool in service of their engagement, achievement, and success. Her workshops and coaching leads teams of educators to investigate equity for each element of their practices, from policies, syllabi, and instruction to assessment. Dr. Garth McCullough.
Thank you, Norma, and welcome everyone. I'm so pleased that you've chosen to join us today. I'll be presenting on the power and potential of differentiated instruction as a tool for equity in higher education. What I hope you take away from this presentation today is that differentiated instruction is a viable, data-driven pedagogical approach for the virtual college classroom that supports engagement and student achievement. This approach strongly aligns with Achieving the Dream's student success vision to lead and support a national network of community colleges to achieve sustainable institutional transformation through sharing knowledge, innovative solutions, and effective practices and policies that lead to improved outcomes for all students. As one of our 7 essential capacities, equity is critical to our student-centered framework. As seen here in an excerpt of ATD's equity statement, We are fueled by the importance of ensuring that each student receives what they need to be successful through the intentional design of the college experience inside and outside of the classroom. And the full equity statement is in the chat if you want to click and read the full equity statement, which really guides our work and structures our mission. And our mission to help institutions use new technology. We share our focus on innovation within teaching and learning to serve the most vulnerable college student populations with our 11 Every Learner Everywhere network partners. Specifically, Every Learner Everywhere supports higher education institutions to use active and adaptive digital learning to improve student outcomes, as Norma already mentioned. I will begin today's presentation with framing differentiated instruction within the context of equity. Then I will discuss its structure, principles, and design elements, and provide examples to illustrate the power of this pedagogical approach in the classroom. Finally, I will end with practical teaching strategies and technological tools that can be used across disciplines to adapt instruction to meet the needs of learners. As student-centered college educators, it is imperative that we design instructional experiences for our students that work against the business as usual and the one-size-fits-all mentality that we're taught to teach and how we were taught, to make sure that we ensure an equitable environment where all students receive a high-quality academic experience that is responsive to their needs, abilities, and employment goals. And that we take institutional responsibility to dismantle and disrupt traditional teaching practices that serve as barriers for students. We are keenly aware that some of our students begin our courses having benefited from access to resources, social capital, academically enriched curricular experiences and supports, while other students enter our courses having had to navigate structural barriers, discrimination, inadequate academic and social supports. And for some, they may experience all of these inequities before they log into your 10 a.m. class. Yet we are continually surprised when we get different student outcomes from traditional curricula that teaches the subject the same way, which disregards the individuals at the receiving end or only considers one type of student or learner. It takes an intentional and focused effort to create an equitable environment in college courses. And I'm well aware that equity is the new buzzword in education, and it's too often misused. We all recognize that equity refers to the principle of fairness, but we can often confuse it with equality, a principle that we're frankly more comfortable with. It has been said that equity is the process and equality is the outcome. And I want to recognize that equity requires a shift that can be uncomfortable for educators who have been taught that the right thing to do is to ignore differences, treat everyone the same, and to be polite. And you think about the first time in a grocery store when a mom is with their child and they point out a difference, someone who looks different, and we were shushed, right? And we probably shushed our children, like, don't stare, don't point, we'll talk about it later. Our comfort level with difference is is mostly out of our comfort zone. And so I recognize that what we're asking with differentiation, it calls for faculty to make equity moves in their classrooms that are fair and just, but not equal, and to recognize the social and historical context of exclusionary practices in American higher education. Dr. Estella Ben-Simone, who I try to pattern much of my work after, charges educators to be equity-minded. And this mode of thinking requires practitioners to take personal and institutional responsibility for the success of their students and critically reassess our practices in many ways that are uncomfortable, and with the acknowledgement that most of us were not taught to teach this way or to view things this way. And so it's a heavy lift, and it takes, I keep saying intentional work, but and also intentional support for faculty to engage in curriculum in this way. And I look at differentiated instruction as one way to address and support an equitable environment. Because differentiated instruction is an equity-minded pedagogical approach that allows faculty to meet the needs of the diverse range of learners in their class. According to the guru, Carol Ann Tomlinson, at its most basic level, differentiating instruction means shaking up what goes on in the classroom so that students have multiple options for taking in information, making sense of ideas, and expressing what they learn. The principles of differentiation include an environment that encourages and supports learning, quality curriculum, assessment that informs teaching and learning, and instruction that responds to student variance. And it's been more popular, obviously, in the K-12 setting, and I think overlooked in post-secondary. But one thing I want you to get from our time today is really the potential for it to work in higher ed settings. And many of these practices you were probably already doing and just not knowing that what the term is called, or that it fits in this approach. Because too often differentiation instruction gets a bad rep for being like individualized instruction or tracking by ability, not just for students with, it's not just for students with learning challenges, and it's not a lowering of standards. Meeting students where they're at is not lowering standards, it's enhancing our instruction to make sure that our learners can access what we're teaching. And differentiated instruction as a student-centered pedagogical approach warrants more consideration in higher ed because it is responsive to students in all the ways that we claim we aim to be. It takes into account a student's learning profile, their needs, their goals. Why are they taking this course? Why are they enrolled in college? What's their readiness, their skill level? It takes into account their abilities and really emphasizes and assesses prior knowledge and in a way that you can use it to decide, to make instructional decisions. It also takes into account the languages students speak and their cultural and social economic backgrounds. When lessons are relevant to student experiences and every learner is valued, research shows students benefit in the classroom and beyond. And as faculty, we often make adjustments to our lessons in real time when it is clear that it isn't working for some students. Differentiated instruction just requires that we be more intentional from the start and keep the learner's varying needs in mind as we design our courses and our instructional activities. This effort involves considering critical factors that help you get to know your students, assess their prior knowledge in informative ways, and monitor their performance on formative assessments, whether you gather information using a paper or pencil assessment or have access to a robust student level data and learning analytics from adaptive courseware. There is the potential for faculty to personalize the student learning experience and environment based on real-time data by course content and objectives. When faculty are equipped with more in-depth information about their student interests, abilities, and content-specific performance, they are in a better position to present meaningful course content and more relevant assignments, assessments, and an overall learning environment and experience. Research shows that differentiated instruction has a positive impact on student learning, equity, and outcomes in post-secondary education. Studies have shown that faculty can address learner variability in their courses by proactively designing curriculum that supports students' needs. An intentional effort is needed, as I've mentioned, to ensure equitable education for all learners as online learning becomes the norm at this critical time in history. And thankfully, differentiation lends itself well to the online modality. As you attempt to make classes more interactive, engaging, and student-centered, you could integrate personalization and authenticity through well-planned instructional activities by using online learning tools. With this approach, it really meets the individual learners where they are along their journeys. And Tomlinson refers to differentiation as orderly flexibility. While it calls for attending to students as individuals, it does not assume separate assignments or individualized instruction. It really relies on flexible groupings and grouping students not just based on their ability, maybe on their interest, and or the learning modality that they're the most comfortable with. And a differentiated lesson will resonate with more students if it targets visual, auditory, tactile, and kinesthetic senses. And this means applying several different teaching approaches in your lessons, such as watching a TED Talk, listening to an audio clip, putting students into virtual breakout rooms for a facilitated discussion. And when I think about differentiated instruction, I think about my daughter who has auditory processing challenges, very bright student, but she does not learn by listening and has been in virtual learning since March at her high school. And so when you only rely on one type of modality to share information, you just think about that how many students you're leaving out of the academic process. And I was sharing the story with someone yesterday that I didn't know she had auditory processing issues, and I put her through Suzuki violin. And if anyone is familiar with that program, you learn the violin at age 4 by ear. And I was literally torturing her, and there were a lot of tears involved. And we did it for many years because I was very focused on she's going to learn violin, and this is the best approach. And not realizing that we were not meeting her needs at all. And she, exhausted so much energy and frustration trying to, meet these objectives that I had placed. So, finally, we found a teacher who would teach her just how to read notes. She played and had a much more enjoyable experience with the violin. But I can report today, she does not play violin. She plays the radio or the streaming service. So all that was for naught. But I want to also point out that institutions benefit with more equitable and high quality educational experiences available to students through an increase in course completion and graduation rates. And we think about many students who drop out or stop out because they're not able to engage and access information and navigate all the colleges and all the systems that we place in front of them without a lot of support. And then to only get into a classroom where they may not be, the content isn't engaging, or they don't see a connection to, when you're making choices, as many of our students are, between putting food on your family's table or studying, it's really important that the content connects with the learner and they can see where this information is going to lead them and how it connects to their career goals as well as their academic goals. And the institutional benefits turn and lead to social and economic opportunities for our students who are historically and systemically marginalized due to factors such as race, class, and gender. So all of those issues are exacerbated when you're dealing with real life issues, as COVID has brought to the forefront, but that have always existed. So to understand how to apply this approach in your online classroom, it's important to note the key pillars of differentiation: content, process, product, and learning environment. So we're going to view an example of a college biology lesson to just illustrate those key pillars. So the instructor adapts content, process, and product based on the academic abilities and learning preferences of their student. In this lesson, the instructor provides differentiated content based on student readiness by varying complexity, amount of scaffolding, and agency on assignments. This allows students to work towards the same learning objectives while studying content appropriate to their level of understanding. Process is differentiated by offering a range of activities and methods to meet course goals so students have the opportunity to learn in the way that best suits their learning preferences and interests. Whether it's reading a chapter, or interacting with an online learning app, designing a cell from an online design program, or identifying cell parts under a microscope simulation, students are working towards mastering course content. And then products can be differentiated by allowing students to demonstrate their knowledge and achievement of course goals in several ways. This allows students to showcase their academic strengths and personal interests while assessing their understanding of course objectives. Oftentimes, faculty will choose to offer a choice of completing a quiz or illustrating and labeling a cell, while others may choose to create an animated cell model. All demonstrate the same content, the same constructs, and their mastery of the objectives. Another example from a college math is from a college math instructor who adapts while teaching quadratic equations. This faculty used different materials or methods to teach the formula based on how familiar students were with the concept. And the objective was to help students at all comprehension levels without lowering performance standards. The content remains consistent, but how students access the content varies. And then based on the students, the instructor differentiates the learning process by offering a range of activities and methods to meet the course goals. It could involve varying the time, tools, or group size that students are working with. And then finally, faculty can vary the way students may use the way students use to demonstrate knowledge and achievement of course goals. So this may include having a choice of taking a test, applying their knowledge to a real world problem, like, how does the quadratic formula relate to, a roller coaster, or doing a presentation. As a result, students learn in the way that suits their learning preference and can better demonstrate their knowledge and ability. The fourth aspect of differentiation is related to the learning environment itself, creating conditions for optimal learning in the classroom. And the importance of this was really showcased in our rapid transition to online learning during the COVID pandemic. The importance of the learning environment being conducive, supportive, engaging, could not be underestimated. Differentiation can increase student engagement and a sense of belonging in the course. And a few strategies that encourage interaction, collaboration, and flexibility include tiered assignments, layered curriculum, and intentional groupings. So when you're teaching online, it's more important than ever to be equity-minded and culturally affirming, which requires faculty to be intrusive, using your early warning systems or LMS data to identify students who are struggling, reaching out to them, either through, or if your institution supports a text platform. I know many faculty have used all their free licenses on every app that the students use to make sure that they could stay connected with students. And also, culturally responsive approach is to be a relational by continuing expressing your investment in your students' success and letting them, validating that they are seen and that they are capable and that they are welcome in this learning experience is really important in an online environment when you're not face to face. And to make sure that the content and the assignments be culturally affirming by acknowledging and leveraging cultural strengths in every aspect of your course. And I know many faculty have found different ways to do each of these things. And if you want to put in the chat some and share out some practices that you have found to be very beneficial for your students and your students have responded to very well, please do. I think it's really important for us to share the what's working as we are all facing these I want to stop saying unprecedented times, but this seem to be never ending unprecedented times. And differentiation instruction online necessitates the use of a variety of instructional materials and practices. Keeping current and experimenting with new technologies increases options in creating an online classroom environment that is engaging and inclusive for all students. So a few examples include student response systems that allow for real-time collaboration and feedback, help instructors better gauge student understanding in order to differentiate the instruction and know where students' prior knowledge is strong and where there's gaps and maybe where there's misunderstandings. Educational games can be used across a range of disciplines. They allow you to monitor student performance and promote self-paced and adaptive learning. And there are also digital tools that can be used to promote interactive discussions and facilitate online roundtables, discussions, and debates. In conclusion, and before we open up for questions, I want to thank you for your time and attention and to acknowledge that most educators were not taught to teach this way. It is not easy, and there's no cookie cutter approach with 3 easy steps that I can give you to follow, because this work needs to be responsive to the students you teach and the context that you teach in. It is important to acknowledge that we are all on an equity-minded journey to center the student experience in teaching and learning in ways that we have not been required to do before. And by adding these elements of differentiation into your classroom through deeper knowledge of student attributes and building variations into your curricula, you will be better positioned to contribute to student engagement, achievement, and success. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have during our remaining time together.
So we do have some questions to direct your way. One of them has to do with some of your earlier comments about equality and equity. And with equity becoming a buzzword, does that mean that organizations such as ATD need to make sure that they update or refine their equity statements to maintain their impact?
Thank you. Great question. I am, equity was a founding principle at Achieving the Dream. And when we started over 16 years ago, and it wasn't a buzzword, I am adamant that we continue our equity work, and we don't let it be just a trend, because I think it has so much potential to really identify where the source of the gaps are. I feel like in education, we've spent a lot of time what I call gap gazing. We look at the data. There's a gap between the white students and the students of color. But we don't have what we don't have is a way forward often to address those gaps and to get to the level, get the data at the level that it is instructive or guides us to where the solutions are. So one of my intentions in this work is really to work with faculty and in the institutional research department and build that alignment so that faculty are at least armed and equipped with their own data and can see where their racial equity gaps are, where their gender equity gaps are, and where their SES gaps are. We report this data in the aggregate often, but that's, as a faculty member, I don't know where I fit in that. I don't know what to do with that. And I don't know where I'm contributing to that gap. And so I am going to work. I mean, and at ATD, we work really hard at not letting the equity just fall off as a trend, and also holding people accountable for understanding what equity is. We misuse it so often, and many of my presentations, I just make sure we have a clear understanding of what equity is and what equity isn't. And most times when we say we think we're talking about equity, we're talking about diversity and inclusion. And I want us to hold ourselves accountable, our institutions accountable for knowing the difference. That, diversity and inclusion are definitely necessary and needed. But when we say we're doing equity work, we need to be doing equity work, which means really targeted, specific, drilled down, disaggregated, at the level of, working at the intersections of students' social identities, employees' social identities, and being true to that work. I often get frustrated, and my colleagues here from Every Learner will tell you, when I see resources that what I call just have equity dust. They put it in the title, they put it, and as a subheading, and then when you drill down to it, they're talking about all students, and they're not naming specific groups that they're talking about, or it's underserved students or underrepresented students. But I want to get us to the point where we're talking about part student, Black, female, part-time, that are part-time students, and our student parents have this issue, are struggling with, are facing this barrier, and we're not serving, Latin males that are veterans, that level. We collect all of this demographic data, and we don't use it I think we don't leverage it as well as we can to inform the instructional practices. So with that said, your second part of your question was updating our equity statement. And we are actually going through a revision of our equity statement. Our president, Dr. Karen Stout, has charged us with a bolder equity statement. So you will look forward to that in the upcoming months. And I also work with a few college teams that are developing and revising their equity statements. And I always start with the definition, because oftentimes we jump into the statement and we want it to be, shiny and glossy, but without understanding of what equity is and what our organizations or what our college's equity stance is. And anyway, so I have grave concerns about exactly what you asked about, that we'll let this focus on equity pass, and not without realizing its goals. And I work and will continue to work tirelessly. And I know at Every Learner, we are very committed to keeping being true to the equity mission.
Thank you. So earlier on, when you were first starting to discuss differentiated instruction, the question came in regarding graduate school work and medical school. Is it possible to use the differentiated instruction in graduate level work?
I think so. I only taught at the graduate level, and I definitely use differentiated instruction. It's, I can't speak to the medical school, although I can say that I've been very impressed with the medical field taking on cultural competence in ways that have been surprising to me, that they're kind of moving ahead, moving faster, I think, sometimes than academia is with understanding the importance of cultural competence. So I'm not going to limit that they wouldn't be able to do differentiated instruction. I'm just not as familiar with, how the classes work and what flexibility you have in medical school. But in graduate school, most definitely, I employed it in, with the assignment options. I used rubrics. I assessed prior knowledge. I worked with teachers who'd been teaching for 15 years, superintendents, and then people, fresh out of undergrad, and felt, always had to adjust and differentiate based on the students in front of me, their career stage, their racial and economic backgrounds, and making sure that my assignments, and I taught things like curriculum, development and assessment and sociology of education, and to there's many opportunities in graduate school, and whether you're in the STEM fields or social sciences or humanities, to differentiate.
Okay, thank you. And this question is something that I've heard a lot as well, and I'd love to hear different answers for it. How do you demonstrate that the differentiated evaluations, such as draw a cell, take a test, do a presentation, how do you demonstrate that they're equitable in their measurement?
So that brings me to, rubrics, right? So if I design a rubric and I base it off the objectives, and then I design an assignment, to make sure that these different pathways all meet those objectives, right? And so that there's an opportunity. So, and when you think about it in terms of Bloom's taxonomy, it's just making sure that, you're hitting at those different levels. And that doesn't only have to be in a paper. I see Amy in the chat mentioned, is it okay to have a student do a verbal presentation, then later write a script? Like, those are the exact methods that you can use if you're worried about, obviously you want to develop students' writing skills, but to start with writing for students who are where that is a stressor, because they've been told they're not good writers and they've been told they're not good students, to begin with an oral assignment and then have them translate that into a written assignment, you can reach your goals. To have a project that you have the certain elements of the project that meet each of those goals. And so the cell example is, you want them to learn the parts of the cell. So whether they tell you these are the parts of the cell, or whether they write it, or whether they do an interpretive dance, they're going to express to you their knowledge of the parts of the cell, and in a way that's more comfortable. So it's just, I think, and Norma, I don't know if you have another take on it, but I think it's just making sure you have your standard, and that the whatever assignment you develop meets that standard. To me, it's you're hitting the same objectives, and you're not lessening the rigor.
So that leads actually very well into our next question, because it has to do with, can you give an example of differentiated content in a single course? It is unclear to one of our participants, and some others as well, I'm sure, how to achieve the same learning outcome when you have different content at different learning levels. That's why, in the classroom and in the departments and things, we've got the curriculum in order to scaffold those levels. But how is it that you can make sure that you're achieving those learning outcomes equally
with different content? So, okay, I know this isn't your question, Norma, but can you give me an example of different content? I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
Achieving the same learning outcome with different content at different learning levels, my understanding would be in terms of how you're handing it in. So as you pointed out, are you going to make a model of the cell? You're going to draw a cell, you're going to do a little podcast on the cell. So how can you assure, when you're doing 3 different pieces of material, how you're actually going to achieve the learning outcome at the level equally?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think that goes back to what I was saying is, you have your, once you have your standard, you want everyone to, achieve this standard. We often place value judgments on which way, if someone writes a research paper, that they must know it more than someone who, does a PowerPoint presentation on it. And so, so I think I'm addressing your question, but I think it's really about just making sure, and this is not easy work to differentiate. I would never say differentiate your whole curriculum, but like at once, but like if you just take one unit at a time and say, maybe instead of having them read a chapter on X, I'll have them, watch a TED Talk or a documentary on it, because that maybe that, that they can get more of the nuances of the material better from that. And so I think some people feel like, oh, but if they're not reading, then they're not learning. But your ultimate goal is to, for them to learn the material. And so to change the modality of the content, I think, it is to make sure that it's at, it meets their readiness level, because the alternative is what we continue to do. We teach to the middle, and we miss the students who are on the, the lower end, where they aren't able to access that information. And then we bore the students that are on the higher end that can move faster and want to take it further. And so it's just really about thinking about your assignments and your assessments, and obviously your major projects, your summative assessments in ways that allow for choice and accountability. And so I use rubrics to just kind of keep myself honest in terms of when I was developing assignments, to make sure that the rubric wasn't like, I didn't write a rubric for the written paper, or the rubric for the oral presentation, and the rubric for the research project. I wrote one rubric with all the standards, and the student would have to demonstrate those capacities and those competencies in whichever modality that they chose.
So how would something like this work in your example with the college algebra? You're wanting the students to learn to solve an equation. How many different ways are there to solve the equation? Or is it that you're looking at different ways to learn how to solve? Is it taking the process rather than, yes, I'm solving the equation, but is it the process of solving the equation? Is that where the variation or the differentiation comes in?
It could be either. Yes. It could be either. So you could, with a differentiated instruction, it's not that you vary the content, the process, and the product for every assignment. Like you could vary the process to get to solving the equation, or you could vary the product for how they show you that they understand the solving of the equation. So you don't have to vary each of those aspects for every assignment.
Okay, now I'm getting a little worried because it sounds like that's an awful lot of work for me as a faculty member who's already not only having to teach, 15 hours worth of courses, plus do committee work, plus, this, that, and the other. How does differentiation then not overwhelm our already overworked and underpaid faculty?
Yes, I completely understand and agree. And so that's why I was saying, when you're designing or building out your course, for those who have the flexibility to do so, you just take it one bit at a time. So one semester, you tweak your one of your assignments and differentiate it, or you think about different ways that you're teaching, and and you're just reiterating, like maybe I lectured on this last time. Let me add a video, or let me assign a TED Talk instead of the paper. So you start building your tools and your toolkit and your as you go. Yeah, because it can be very overwhelming. If anyone asked you, like, differentiate your whole curriculum, no way is anyone doing that. But just as you're saying, okay, I always did it when I'm like, this isn't hitting what I want. I'm not getting, this isn't landing the way I want to land. They're not getting it. And then I would go to, like, what can I do differently to to address the needs. And so like I said, many of these practices you're already doing as you continually improve your course, because once you see that I think none of us are probably still teaching the way that we taught anything the first day we taught it, right? You're constantly iterating the way we approach it, a lesson or an assignment. So it's just building that in and being thoughtful about being intentional about building that in when you can, but bite-sized, Norma, bite-sized, not the whole, not, I would even start with the whole unit. One, if you start one semester, next semester, I'm going to differentiate one day, one assignment, one assessment. And and then over time, you start getting, I developed a repertoire of like, okay, even when I taught different courses, I had these, different choice assessment option, product option, in my, at my fingertips, and I wasn't recreating it every time. It was adapting it to that material.
Okay. I was a little worried that we were going to overwhelm all these faculty, and I started feeling overwhelmed going, man, I have to do this all overnight.
No, not at all.
Could you give us an example of both a tiered assignment and layered curriculum that you mentioned earlier in your examples?
Yes. I can, most definitely. Hold on. I had that. I knew I was going to get that question. I had that in my notes. So tiered assignment is, a layered assignment is, you have, it's based off of Bloom's taxonomy, and every student goes through every layer, but you start with like from rote and, all the way to synthesis. And you vary it in terms of, you vary the work in terms of complexity for at each layer. So you're just intentional about making sure you're hitting every level of Bloom's taxonomy, and within that you can give choice, but it's just you're just making sure you take them from rote all the way to synthesis, and not stopping at rote. Okay, they all they have is all they've learned is the vocabulary. Can they apply it? Can they synthesize it? And you just make sure that you build those layers into your into your assessment and your process. Tiered is where you differentiate based on choice, accountability, and I think complexity. So that's just where you it's just a different way to approach differentiated instruction, where you're very specific about making sure you have choice, making sure students are accountable for demonstrating their learning. So if you give an assignment where they've written a paper, you then have them do an oral defense of what they wrote to make sure they understand it, and to assess their level of the depth of their understanding.
Okay, we have commentary in the chat that I'm going to try to reiterate as best I can here. So much of being able to, it's basically noticing one owns implicit biases real time to reduce the barrier of colorblind individualism, so that we feel more direct in making desegregated learner groups. Correct? Not correct? Are we on the right path there? Second part of that is, in other words, isn't equity-based differentiated instruction all about being culture conscious in confronting our own implicit biases during learning interactions and content decision?
Yes, absolutely. This work, and Norma shared my bio at the top of the hour, and I am, my passion, my research is based in culture responsive teaching, and I see differentiated instruction well aligned with culture responsive teaching, which, like you said, starts with that self-awareness, knowing where our blind spots are, knowing how culture, what role culture plays in our instruction, and confronting our own biases, and interrogating our own practice to identify, where we may be perpetuating the isms, right? And intentionally, unintentionally, We often in our practice do how we were taught, or or you're handed this syllabi and you don't question it. And what all of this work, equity-minded teaching work, asks us to do is let's start questioning a little more about why we do what we do, who it serves, and what ways we are perpetuating, racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, in our classrooms, it requires us to be vulnerable, but it comes through in what we assign, the content that we assign to read, the assignments that we construct or develop, the way we speak in class, who we speak to in class. It's so many layers that our biases are demonstrated, and our students experience our biases. And so it definitely takes intentional self-awareness work to do this well.
So doesn't it help then to use universal design so that many bases of differentiation are covered as the instructors work on reducing our biases in real time?
Yes. None of these things are in conflict with each other. They're all serve the same purpose of really equity-minded teaching practices that meet learners where they are. It's just I feel like in higher ed, there's so many teaching approaches that we have not really adopted and differentiated, culture responsive. In K-12, the K-12 space has been talking about this and working and for years. And a lot of times as post-secondary educators, we've been I don't want to say shielded, but we haven't been really asked to or required to adapt our instruction in these ways, and or even been brought into the conversation of student success. It's like that inside the black box, where it's like no one knows what goes on in the classroom, and it's always been it irks me, but a lot of this work is optional. Like, would you like to go to a PD about differentiated instruction or culturally responsive? And we view it as optional. And it's only the super users of the Center for Teaching and Learning hubs that are, trying and taking risks and trying new things out to meet the needs of their students. And that's what goes back to what I was saying earlier. Then we're like, I don't know how we're still surprised that we're not getting the outcomes that we desire when we are not, when we haven't made the changes. We haven't made changes to many of us haven't made the changes to, or we're not required to make changes to our practice.
So another question / comment, do you have often give a person first assignments using the product that best meets their needs, and then later give an assignment that lets them build their skills? For example, let a student who doesn't like to write do a verbal presentation, but later require them to write the script for a video or something else that enables them to build their writing skills. So could you build on that a little bit more and kind of help integrate not only with that, but some more concrete examples that could be used?
Yeah, so one of my colleagues is a faculty developer at an institution, and he talks about, he did a observation of statistics, and this is a community college, and two faculty members, they were on the same content and it was the same day, and he went in to the first course, and the faculty member started off with like, seemingly it was a pop quiz, or the students seemed to be thrown, caught off guard that there was a quiz, so not quite sure where the if there was a disconnect or if it was expected, but they started off with a quiz. The students, went into panic mode. They shut down. She never got them back. After they handed in, they're like, they focused on what they they were very focused on what they didn't know. They didn't do well on the quiz. And, she went on to teach, and they wouldn't engage. They wouldn't discuss. They were shut down. Later on that day, he goes into another faculty member's course and started off with, come to the board and, add to the whiteboard, your understanding of this, the concepts. And so they worked together, they used collaboration, they were able to orally express their knowledge and had no idea they were being assessed, right? And that class, the energy and that engagement, was, maintained throughout the day, the class time. And so that to me is an example. And so then it's not that the faculty member stopped there with the whiteboard, but then the students they built their confidence, and then they, went on to an assignment, which was, okay, now write down what you understood. And those students did better, had a better experience, and really were using, what I said, culturally responsive teaching approaches, in that they relied more on the oral presentation and more collaboration, as opposed to the individualistic, assessment that shut the students down. So just and they both got to the same place. The students, everyone took a quiz, but it was the approach built the confidence and honored what the students knew, and also gave them an opportunity to work with each other to develop their understanding. So that's that's one example that comes to my mind about how you can start with one way, but then still get them to, if you have a modality or a format that you want to work with them, that you want them to develop their skills in, that you transfer it, as opposed to start in that modality, which might cause them to feel that they don't understand.
Okay, we are running out of time. I would love to thank you, Dr. Garth McCullough. This has been a wonderful presentation, very engaging. We've had some wonderful questions. We do ask that our audience take a few minutes to complete our survey for today's presentation using the link that we're putting in the chat right now. If you've got something going on immediately after, don't worry. We will send you the link to the survey when we send you the recording and the slide deck, which will both should come into your email inbox on Tuesday. We get our videos closed captioned, so we do that over the weekend. We send those emails out on Tuesday. You'll get the slide deck link, you'll get the recording link, and you'll get the link to the survey if you don't have time to take it right now. As a quick reminder, we do encourage you to visit the Every Learner Everywhere website, our resources page. There were some questions in the chat about coaching. We offer one-on-one coaching through the Expert Network page. So if you want to go on there and look at our experts and sign up for a no-cost session, we have these 1-hour sessions with our coaches. You're welcome to do that. We encourage it. I would like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. We look forward to seeing you next week. Our webinar is Addressing DEI Issues in STEM Education. Thank you so very much for today.